Yeah, Street PAR or Street Participatory Action Research. Let me just explain it in this way, right? So it is a methodological framework, and we definitely target and recruit and train street identified populations to do research and activism. We have the data collection team, we have a data analysis team, right? We have a literature review team, so they're identifying articles and they're writing and throughout the duration of the project, right? Data analysis, they're cleaning, organizing, managing all of this data that is coming in. Right, the transcripts, the surveys, they're letting us know because they're listening to the interviews, what we're missing, what we're moving too fast on. And then we have the action team, right? And their job is to do action from beginning to end, right? And every 2 weeks we meet for a 3-hour meeting. So there's lots of autonomy, right? And different leadership roles, right? And we have these sub teams, right? That are very dynamic. And then we come back every 2 weeks so we can really see where we're at, and then we go back to our camps. But that's the rhythm of the project throughout. I would say after the funding period, we're bringing the doctoral student model to the street corners. So when the funding period ends for traditional research projects, it's the same kind of deal. Students are paid, but when the lines are up, they're up, but the students are invested because they're working on a dissertation or a master's thesis, or I just want to co-author a journal article with you because I want to get that on my CV. And that's what we're working with them on. Or let's go out on the road and give a talk. Or we got to do a screening of our documentary. Or we got to organize another art show or whatever. And not only that, but it's important for us to always meet as well so that we can always troubleshoot, and or, talk about jobs or talk about what's going on in their lives or talk about some of their challenges. We find reasons to meet after the funding period. We do lots of arts related activism. Music, right? And we release 2 mixtapes, People's Report mixtape and also Knowledge is a New Hustle mixtape. And it highlights poetry and hip hop and music and all of that, right? But we do the arts as a form of action all the way to, we do a lot of public speaking as well with panels, but keynoting and organizing those kind of speaking events inside communities. Definitely we got to do actions with the men and women who are Street PAR members and help them move from point A to point B, right? But that's action targeted to Street PAR members. And then there's actions, right, targeted or organized inside communities. Street PAR was designed or developed so that men and women in the streets can reclaim their dignity, reclaim their purpose in life. It allows them not only to be equipped with a skill set, but it also allows them to now really do some research in this and activism that's more meaningful from their perspective. And their perspective, right, is underscored with the Street PAR model, right? Most research was traditional research, whether it's progressive or conservative, is generally moving through the perspective of the literature or other academicians. And that's cool too. I think there's a place for that. But Street PAR is about honoring the ideas and the integrity and the goals of a target community and not compromising that, right? Street PAR is also about power. It's about socio-political power, right? So it's not about just doing action for action. It's not about doing action once or twice at the end of the project, right? It's about doing hard-hitting, clever action or activism throughout the duration of the project. And all of those experiences, right, being trained, learning, designing, executing the project, the research and the activism actually helps a person, particularly like over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period. It actually assists someone in transforming in a real way. In the way that they want to transform or evolve. So Street PAR is many things. It's a roadmap, it's a methodological framework. It's a way that a community not only can reclaim itself, but also can fight back. Wilmington, Delaware is one of the more violent cities in the country, but it's not a Wild Wild West scenario. There's a rhythm to the violence, and it kind of happens in targeted areas, right? So keep in mind, most people in the street we learn aren't violent people, not a form of identity. They're violent as a form of the situation or as a consequence of a particular situation, what we call situational violence. In fact, David Kennedy, his work argues that maybe 1 to 5% of any city's total population is responsible for the violence, right? And so, long story short, when you end up doing the math in a city like Wilmington, right, it's a small city, and actually sat down with Dr. Kennedy, and we realized that it was about 70 people. And most of them aren't violent as a form of identity. So we learned a lot about that. We learned that most people who experience violence, right? Most people who experience, you have two critical masses. You have one group that's repeatedly experiencing it, but it's a small critical mass, right? And that small sample can create the impression, right? Because one death is one too many. But it can create that feeling, that sentiment, as if things are worse than what they are. Keep in mind, homicide is a fraction of a percent of the total U.S. population. About 15,000 people actually kill one another per year, and maybe 6,000 or 7,000 of those are black men, right? So people aren't violent, at least in the ways that we think. I said, wow, it's a wonderful opportunity to test psychological and social well-being, to test esteem. Because it's always been argued, especially in a city like Wilmington, that they have low self-esteem. We found the opposite. We found more specifically, black men and women in the streets, the crack cocaine dealers, the sex workers, the people who commit armed robberies. We're talking about, I'm saying it that way to be provocative to some extent, but I want us to really hear who we're talking about. No, those folk don't hate themselves. Most low-income populations generally have higher self-esteem than their middle and upper middle class counterparts. That is the irony of it all, right? So it's folk like me that are seeing the therapist or that are struggling. So we collect data around this, but our messaging around structural violence. And again, we draw that theory from Johann Galtung, particularly in 1969 is when he talks a lot about structural violence theory. But he's making the argument, Galtung, that institutions and systems are organized in such a way to prevent individuals, groups, and communities from meeting their basic needs. When I'm on the ground in Wilmington, Delaware, these men and women are essentially saying the same thing. They are prevented from thriving. Now, as an academic, what do you do with that? Right? I can choose to ignore it or dismiss it or help them think about it differently. Which, or I can help them figure out how to translate this sentiment and this concern, right, in an empirical way, right? But they are clear in the streets of Wilmington that their community is being structurally sabotaged so that other parts of the community, other parts of our society can thrive. And I think what's most interesting about the structural violence argument is that the deal for me to do Street Par in Wilmington was that I could not ignore that. I could not ignore that argument. I had to figure out a way to incorporate it in an explicit way. So my name is Dr. Yasser Arafat Payne. I'm on faculty in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. I also have a line in Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. I am a trained social psychologist and street ethnographer.